Good evening. Oh, okay, wait a minute. I got a crowd here today, and I am looking for more interaction from this crowd that I have here. It's a beautiful crowd here, and those online, you can't see us, but they look gorgeous. We want to welcome you to our first family wellness weekend, and this is a community event where we bring information on how faith, fellowship, and therapy can help people build better families. And first of all, what they do is they help them to build a better life for themselves. So we say thank you, and I'm going to say welcome to those in the auditorium again. One more time, welcome. They're awake now. So thank you for that warm welcome. At this time, we're just going to acknowledge the Lord in prayer, and then we will present our speaker for tonight, Helene Goble, who is a licensed marriage family therapist who came all the way from Sacramento, California to come and share with us tonight. We're excited and grateful for this opportunity to learn more about what impacts us as individuals so we can unlock the potential that we have and that our children and our families have. So because we believe that it takes more than one set of tools, it takes more than faith for some people. It takes more than faith and fellowship for some people. And that's okay. Some people, they need extra support, and God has allowed man to understand the mind, and they have tools, tips, and techniques that can help each one of us build a better life and in turn build a better family. So we're going to acknowledge the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this awesome group of attendees that have come. Lord, some are parents, some are grandparents, some are aunts and uncles that want to understand how can I be a better person? How can I deal with trauma and stress and the different things that I'm encountering in life? And we know you have all the answers, and you've given us tools to use to build better families, Father God. So we ask that you would be with our speaker on tonight, that you would give her the wisdom, Lord God. Give her the words, Lord God. Bless this beautiful audience that's in attendance, those that are online, those that may be joining in and watching the replay. We pray that you would bless their needs likewise. In Jesus Christ's most precious name we pray. Amen. All right. I'm sorry. We have a quick announcement. If you are the owner of a 4-door gray license plate begins with DC 4127 and then an 8, you need to move your vehicle. You need to move your vehicle. So if you're the owner of a 4-door gray Honda LX, please move your vehicle. So at this time, we're asking that you would help us welcome Helene Goble.
Very nice to be here. I feel like it's a privilege and a blessing to be here. One of the things that drew me into this type of work is some of the challenges that we went through as a family, some of the challenges I went through growing up. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those things that cause problems, but we also are going to talk about ways that we can thrive. So off we go. So how can we help our families thrive? We can reduce trauma, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to understand how to work through it. We're going to learn how to self-regulate, which to me is absolutely essential. It might seem like a little small part, but it's almost the most important part. Oh, it's not on. Oh, now it is. Okay. You okay with that up there? Okay. So reducing trauma, understanding how to work through it, learning how to self-regulate, like I said, that's essential. That one, I just want you to put an asterisk by that one. And understanding attachment wounds, understanding parenting styles, and having tools for conflict resolution. Those things are going to be what we're going to look at in this topic. And also knowing deeply, and I put that word deeply because it's possible, that we can do this. We have the ability to be able to work through all those things that we just talked about. So what is trauma? It's an event that we could not stop. It's an event where we didn't have a choice. Sometimes it's ongoing threats to our sense of safety. Sometimes it's drastic changes for the family. It can show up as flashbacks of events that happened and replay in our mind over and over and over. Sometimes you'll just have a flashback occasionally when you're in a similar circumstance. It could be a similar time of year. It could be a similar smell. It could be a similar song that you remember from a time. And when those things hit our five senses, one of them or all of them, what'll happen is your midbrain will pull up some files and some information that will affect you. So again, what is trauma? It can also be ICU experiences, surgeries. Sometimes we didn't know that caused trauma for our children. We also know that children often, when they're very young, and I've had several clients in this particular scenario. One in particular was the day she was born, she had surgery. And yet, as she was 11 years old, she was being treated for ADHD and given a stimulant medication. She didn't have ADHD. She had trauma. And so her body was acting, or her symptoms looked like ADHD, but her body had stored the trauma. And it was, I would say, a misdiagnosis for that young lady. And it was really hard on her. The stimulant medication was causing a lot of suicide ideation. And so this young lady, we finally were having this conversation, and it was like, well, what is the history here and exactly what happened? And I don't know how these things get missed, but that's what she had had. And so she went off the medication, she started to do some processing work, and it totally shifted the way she was able to be, and it was wonderful. Attachment wounds, that's also something that will store in our midbrain, and it will show up affecting us. Moving often. Now, sometimes a move is exciting. You know, you're going to move to a new place, or you're going to have a new home, or maybe you'll get a bigger home. But sometimes it's not something that you're planning. Sometimes it's something that, I was telling the sister today, we had a move in our family, and it was a literal nightmare. And when you have something like that happen, it stores, and it'll affect you later. Unhealthy parenting styles is also something that can cause trauma, whether it was our own parents that parented us. And I always tell my clients, they did the best they could. They really were trying to do everything they possibly could. But often we had ways of parenting that were extremely punitive and really rough. And we had some trauma that was stored around that. There's also generational trauma. There's also what I like to refer to as a full bucket. And that full bucket is something we're going to talk about pretty extensively. And it's something that sounds really negative, but there's so much hope around understanding how your nervous system works and how this full bucket is. It is what it is, but it can be processed. So how to recognize the effects of trauma? Sometimes you'll see it in each other. Sometimes you'll see it in the kids. Sometimes you'll see it in family members. But you'll see a short temper, somebody lacking in patience, and you think, they're just grumpy all the time. Well, they could have this trauma that's kind of been there with them, and it just seems normal to them, and they stay a little bit on the grumpy side, short temper, short fuse, lacking in patience. So also we see that sometimes people with trauma can be kind of edgy all the time. We like to explain it as there's a part inside of us that is ready to be cranked up to get ready to do for an emergency. Well, people that have had a lot of trauma stay in that upticked way of feeling ready for that emergency. We call it hypervigilance, but it is very taxing to the system. It can wear you out because you're not really meant to be ready to go all the time. But if your nervous system is ready to go all the time, I mean, can you imagine if I had to do this for, an hour? I would be exhausted. So if people have had a lot of trauma and they're on that edge type of, hypervigilant state, it's a really tough way to be. It's a way to recognize the effects of trauma. Also, people that have had a lot of trauma are unable to tolerate stress well. And I could say that from my experience. When I didn't really realize that I had what I call a full bucket, and I actually brought you a bucket so that we can see. This is the term that I use to describe our midbrain. And our midbrain, we'll show some pictures. Our midbrain is a part of the brain that holds information, not because it's trying to sabotage us, but it's trying to keep you safe. So my example that I like to use with the kids is picture if you were camping and you were making s'mores or you were at a campfire and something at the campfire, either a spark or part of the s'more stick, burned you and it really hurt and you had a pretty significant wound from it. If a year goes by and you ask that little kid, hey, let's do s'mores again, the little kid is going to say, no, I don't want one. And the parent's going to say, come on, it's good, let's do it. No, I don't want to. And they would pull back. Well, there's a reason why. They have stored that information in this example, that being by a fire, being by the s'more stick, being by the marshmallows and the chocolate and the grams, that is going to possibly give them another injury. So they don't want to participate. But then sometimes we just override that with our kids. I did, oh, it's fine, come on, get over it. Well, sometimes we have to work through it to get over it. And so it's not something that you can tell someone to do. They have to work through it. So a lot of times it'll look like in a stressful situation, they can't handle it. And when I was growing up, my parents would say, and they meant well, always meant well, they would say things like, that was in the past. You don't have to think about that. Or just get over it. Or it's not a big deal, And so we would, little kids, we don't know any better. We want to please our parents, and so we would try. And what we would do is just stuff it down. And just stuff it so that we would just be okay, it looks like on a face that we're okay, but we weren't. And so it causes, that stuffing causes a lot of trouble. So often in children, you'll see trouble concentrating. If they've had trauma, you'll see that they're distracted. Now look at the last 4 things that I put up, even really all 5 of them. That is basically some of the symptoms of ADHD. So is it ADHD or is it trauma? So I actually wrote an article with that title, and it's somewhere on the web, I don't know where, but it's out there. And it was written to a group of parents because parents often will take the advice from maybe a school teacher or a relative. Hey, your kid is hyper. You need to take him or her to the doctor and get medicine because they're just, they can't sit still in the classroom. And so the parent, what do they do? I don't know, so they go and treat it that way with a stimulant. Now, if a kid has ADHD, I think stimulant meds are very helpful. I have 4 boys. They were all diagnosed at one point, at different, and some tried the medication, it didn't work. But it's not that we thought medication was terrible. It was actually pretty beneficial for one of ours. It was really helpful. But it's not always, the symptoms aren't always equal to what you're seeing. Sometimes you'll see the symptoms and it could be something else. Also, the effects of trauma are that oftentimes somebody will be very worried about the future. You know, there's kind of like an excess worry about the future. And usually that's for a good reason. When you think about somebody that's been traumatized and they have really high anxiety, there's nothing wrong with them. It's that their nervous system is telling them, watch out. Take, care here. Be careful. And there's that, again, that hypervigilance. So what can we do about trauma? Sounds so horrible. This one's bad? Okay. We'll trade it. You good with that one? All right. So what can we do? So the good news is we can understand how our nervous system works. And it's simple, but it's straightforward, and it's not anything that we can't figure out, although I never knew anything about this when I was raising our kids. So I wish I could push the rewind button and do it over again. But I can't. What can we do about trauma? We can learn what parts of the brain are reacting and have some kind of normalizing what's happening and understand it a little bit better. We can also process the events. We can know what's happening in the brain so that we can realize that this storage system that we have in our midbrain is totally normal. It's not a disorder. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong. Your brain is actually working very well. And when we have that storage and you see it as storage, you can say, I've got storage, not, I'm broken, I'm messed up, I'm a hot mess, I'll never feel better. Yeah, we can work through it. So knowing what is happening in the brain, that it's normal, is quite a relief. It was for me anyway. So we can learn how to self-regulate. And remember I said put an asterisk by that one, because that one is really important. So our next slide is about the brain. And I want you to notice the very front part on the far right, and that is our prefrontal cortex area. And the whole pink part, we're going to just call that the cortex, or the thinking part of the brain. And that thinking part is the part where we do math, where we analyze, where we try to figure things out, where we try to decide what we're going to do, especially in the front part is where we make decisions. But our bucket, that's in the middle. So if our bucket is in the middle and somebody comes to me to do therapy and I'm only engaging that pink part or the cortex, I'm missing it. And that poor person is stuck with thinking that they're never going to get better. But we just went to the wrong part. So that is what I did for years. I worked in the school district. I worked with kids, families, couples in this program that we had. And it was a part of the school district where the kids had a certain kind of insurance that was hard. It was like they were in poverty, so the kids and the families were coming through what we called at that time, and it's different now, but at that time it was called Medi-Cal. And so these Medi-Cal families would come through this program and they would try to improve maybe behaviors in the classroom. So we would engage the pink part and try to get them to think differently, behave differently, try this new technique, try this ABCD approach to think differently. Change your behavior about this, change that. Let's do sticker charts. Let's do reinforcements, positive reinforcement. We did everything we could possibly think of, and the kids kept coming back. It was pretty discouraging. I would say I was depressed until I had veterans. And when I started working with veterans, I did a volunteer thing with them through it was called the Soldiers Project. And when I worked with them, and I did that same old, we called it cognitive behavioral therapy, oh my goodness, you could see how it was not working. And I got, curious, hungry. I wanted to find a way to help them, and it wasn't working, this cognitive behavioral therapy, engaging the cortex. So I went to this training, I don't even know how I ended up out there because it was about 40 minutes from our house. It was another 3 towns over. I really don't remember why I went. But when I went there, I just cried because this woman presented this picture of how we are working in the wrong part of the brain and we need to work in the midbrain. So it's kind of we'll just call it the subcortical or under the cortex, the limbic system or the midbrain. And that was where we stored, and I gave it this name. They don't say that, but I call it the bucket. They said that this is where the trauma or the events are stored. This is where, not for all clients, because some clients do really well with cognitive behavioral therapy, but this is for clients and these veterans that I was working with that were traumatized and had complex PTSD. They would not improve with cognitive behavioral therapy. And so she did this presentation, and it was about how we store information differently than we understood previously. She introduced some information from Peter Levine, who started to understand that we store trauma in our bodies. I actually went to some trainings that is now called somatic experiencing, which is about working through trauma out of the body. And it sounds so odd. It sounded so unusual because we weren't working in that part of the brain. We didn't even know about it. But when I started to see the veterans I was working with improve drastically and change really kind of the course of where they were headed, in our area, the fall that I started this type of work, right after I had learned about this type of work, we had 22 suicides from our veteran population between September and November. So that's 3 months, September, October. It was a very brief amount of time, but this model of cognitive behavioral therapy to treat trauma was completely ineffective. And one of the veterans that died was an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker. And it was heartbreaking. How could that be? We have to do something different. And so I was trained in this type of processing and just got, once you start to see a little bit of movement or improvement that was miles past the movement we saw before, it got to be very exciting. So I get really excited about this because there is so much hope in this type of work. So how does the nervous system work? We'll dive right in. Our brain is designed to hold events. It has a lot of things. I mean, our other guest here will, spin circles around my knowledge of the brain. But I know our brain is it is very efficient, but one of the things that it is designed to do is to protect us and keep us safe. And so our brain, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, where you're walking down somewhere and something's flying at you from the side, and you flinch before you could even see it. Your brain is always scanning to make sure you're safe. So if something's falling, you can kind of sense it, That's your brain, and using your optic nerve to scan to keep you safe. So this bucket in our midbrain, it really doesn't look like this, but it holds all that information about things where you were hurt. I have some examples here. So you got your bucket. Can you guys see the bucket? Yeah. Okay. So our brain holds these events, and sometimes something like an unplanned move, like I mentioned, that happened to us, will go in the bucket. And then every time, literally, when people talk about moving, I start to get kind of a little antsy. It was a horrible move for us, for me in particular. I was 8 months pregnant, actually 8.5, and it was just one of those things, it just didn't work out real well. And so when people talk about moving, I like, so it's in my bucket, that move that we had. But when we're growing up, if there's a lot of criticism in our family, it'll go in our bucket. And then you'll notice 25 years later, you're married, and maybe your husband or wife or maybe a family member says, "Oh, you got mustard on your shirt." And they say, Why are you always picking on me? What, can't you ever see anything I do right? And the other person is like, you just have mustard on your shirt. I mean, it had nothing to do with criticism. It was simply a comment. But you know, when we have that stored, it's not funny, it hurts. And the whole nervous system raises up and says, threat, incoming threat. And it feels intensely, and we call it, the bucket gets triggered. Okay, so that's one that we probably have all experienced, right? Sometimes we've had things that have happened to us that cause fear, and that will go in our bucket. And those things could be simply something happened when you were a kid in the dark, and then you hate going down the dark hallway, you know. I've had kids come in for therapy, and they literally can't go get their pajamas on or go brush their teeth if the hall light is off or nobody's back in the hallway. Serious fear. And, you know, we got to the bottom of it, and it was a certain event that happened. And it was like, okay. So that always tells me, every time I see that we have all those things in our bucket, and those symptoms that we manifest are always for a good reason. They're always for something that either happened or we experienced, or sometimes kids see stuff on TV, and it's traumatic for them. Also, accidents. Bike accident, car accident, household accident, those things go in our bucket as trauma. Violence. It could be violence that kids see on TV. It could be stuff in the neighborhood. It could be in the house. It could be in grandparents' house, and that violence will go in your bucket, and it will keep you hypervigilant. Loss. We know that that's obviously something that is painful, and it will go in our bucket. Sometimes it'll stay dormant for many years, but it's in there. Bad breakups. It could be just a friendship in 4th grade. It could be something that happened your sophomore year. It could be something that happened later in life, but a breakup can go in the bucket and just stay in there and just really cause reactivity. Obviously, abuse, and there's all kinds of abuse that we know about. Verbal, emotional, sexual, all kinds of abuse, but that will go in the bucket. Remember, the brain wants to keep you safe. Poverty. There was a time when I was growing up and my dad left the home, and oh my goodness, it was scary because the outside of our house looked like we were fine, but not on the inside, and it was scary. No money. What are you going to do? How are you going to keep your family going? But my mom figured out a way to do it, but it was not easy, and we could tell there was something really going on. It was a undercurrent of, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Nope, we're not doing that. Nope. And it was like, what is happening? Well, then you multiply that by, you know, like some of the people that we might know in our neighborhoods. You might not know what's going on in that family. If somebody lost a job, if somebody is having trouble getting work, it might not look like something, but those kids and those people in the family will become very traumatized by a lack of funds to pay the rent, to pay the groceries. It affects you in a way that almost can cause, in the future, hoarding. It can cause all kinds of things. So those can go in our bucket. Even just hurts, you know, a friendship, a family member. It can go in the bucket and stay in there, maybe dormant, maybe it's more obvious, but those hurts, they're there. They have to be addressed, and you know what? We can work through them and let them complete. And we know that divorce also directly affects families. It happens. My family had a divorce. My mom and dad divorced. Actually, for me, it was a good thing, but you know. So, you know, everybody can look at it differently, but for some, it was devastating. You know, I was like, wow. But we won't go there. So, our brain holds those events to keep us safe, right? So, when we have those events, I had a lot of them in there, and you guys could probably relate to some of them, but just think how heavy that midbrain would be getting with all of that, okay? I didn't write very many of them. There's a lot more. And it brings me to the information that we have about the ACEs test, and that's adverse childhood experiences, and it's an assessment. But that assessment, I'm talking about a little bit tomorrow, is not covering all the bases. It has some of the bases, but it's not covering all of them. And so just like my list was limited here, there's a lot of things that can go in the midbrain and kind of stay stored in there, and then they'll come up at different moments, and you'll feel that reactivity and you'll feel that intense trigger. So again, your brain's not broken, it's working very well, but it is trying to keep you safe. So it's normal to have a reaction to something that's similar in a different setting. Or, like I said, some people may have had a great loss a certain time of the year, Christmas. So every Christmas, you're going to have a reaction to that. And you think, why do I hate Christmas? It's not that you hate Christmas, but something happened that affected your comfort or your love of that time of year. I had something happen in September one year. And then the next September, I was like, wow, I'm really remembering that and different things about it and everything about it. And I thought, I didn't know anything. This was a long time ago. But as I have learned about this type of work, I realized that my brain stored it. And at that time of year, when the weather starts to change, the kids go back to school, there's different advertisements that you'll see about back to school and things like that. It was triggering that memory. So our brain is telling us to be careful, and it's really warning us of an incoming threat. And that's what we have. That's the system that is working actually very well. And that threat, I think when you think about it, it's designed to keep you safe, but if you think about a lot of criticism growing up, and then you get criticized by a boss or a coworker or a family member later on, you wouldn't call it really a threat, but your nervous system picks it up as, uh-oh, them's fighting words, I don't want to. And the person is just saying, I just thought you needed to know that, something about a meeting or something. And then they're shocked and surprised that you're so, they say you're sensitive. Well, you're not sensitive. It's your brain is pulling up some information to try and get you prepared and ready. So it's not broken again. It's just telling us that there's an incoming threat. Sometimes the signal is on repeat, and we stay nervous or upset for many years. We know that sometimes when people have had a lot of trauma early on and things, remember I said that you didn't sign up for it, you didn't choose it, it wasn't something that you asked for, it was something that just happened to you. Well, if that happens, sometimes it can store really deep anger. And that anger will stay in that bucket and kind of stuffed down in there. But then every once in a while, somebody will touch something that touches what you were angry about, and it'll come out as rage. And I'm not trying to be funny. It is strong. You can feel it from the bottom of your toes all the way through the top of your head. And it is literally stored anger about something that happened to you that you didn't have a choice. And your brain is telling you you're under threat. This is really upsetting. And so then after you go, what was that about? I don't understand. So how does the brain react? We know that the midbrain will get triggered, so a message will go to that midbrain bucket. And it's interesting. You think of your 5 senses, what you can see, smell, hear, taste, feel, all of your 5 senses. A trigger can come in through any one of those senses. So sometimes it will be, and this sounds interesting, but when I was a kid, if the front door opened and I heard Florsheim shoes, clunk, 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 I went into hypervigilance. Oh no. Ugh. Literally head to toe. So if I hear that sound, the front door opens, clump, 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 I have to go, it's not happening now. There's no threat now. I have a wonderful husband, but he wears the same shoes. But it doesn't traumatize me anymore, but I had to get used to that. That is not the same trigger. I mean, it's not the same sound that's going to equate to, oh no. So we get flooded with adrenaline when we get that happen to us, when we get triggered. Our body gets the adrenaline flowing through us. It makes our muscles feel strong. We get in that ready to go type of position. We go into fight or flight. And there's also freeze or fawn or flop or, there's all different ones. But mainly fight or flight. And that's that mechanism that our body has to survive, right? It's for a good reason. It doesn't mean we're broken or we have an anxiety disorder. It means that we need to be ready to handle this threat. So the prefrontal cortex, or the command center, and that was that part of the brain that's right here. The interesting thing about a full-on trigger that we will have that upsets us is this will temporarily go off. Off. So if this is the command center, and this is where we make decisions, and it's off, what's going to happen? What's going to come out? Now, we are wired this way to survive. So if we are triggered and our command center is off, it's brief, but it's meant to have us do something to take care of the emergency right now. But we don't live in the forest with animals chasing us anymore. But we do live in homes, and we have, living rooms and kitchens. And if we feel triggered and this is going off, doesn't work out very well. So we have to realize when we're triggered, because it's not a good time to have a conversation. And you probably all know what I mean. Yeah. It's not a good time to have a discussion about what you think about this thing or that thing. You need a little bit of a break because you need this back on. You want to get that back on. And so we often overreact, right? It happens. It happens. But we're going to talk about ways to improve that. Now, the prefrontal cortex is that part in the front, and that's the part we want to keep on. We want it to stay on. And when that's on, we can think more clearly. We can have the ability to make a better decision. We can stay engaged in the present. When that's off, you're saying things, I'm not talking about, terrible, horrible things, but you're just not able to filter what you should say or shouldn't say. Now, the cortex is that thinking part of the brain, but the bucket part that I call the bucket is in that limbic system, number two. So we want to understand when we're triggered, we're not going to think clearly. When we're under a full-on adrenaline fight or flight, it's not a good time to make a decision. That's the time to figure out a way, and we'll talk about it, how to get regulated, how to calm down, how to get your nervous system back online so the prefrontal cortex is working once again. Now, this is really important because I want you to remember this. Ready? Ready? Remember this. Sometimes it's a brain storage problem, not an intentional misbehavior problem. Sometimes it's a brain storage problem, something that happened, and it's not an intentional misbehavior, whether it's your spouse, your sibling, your child, even other people that we interact with at work, at school. Sometimes it's a brain storage problem, and it's not that they're intentionally trying to, mess with you. So if we can have that understanding, we can see people that are in that full-on flooded, triggered state. We can see them a little differently. We're like, I wonder. Maybe they're triggered. Maybe they're not just being a complete horrible person. Maybe they're just going through something right now that maybe they don't even understand what's happening. So I'm going to just calm down with this. So what's in your bucket? I would say that in my bucket, I wrote them for a reason. A lot of those applied, not all of them, but a lot of them. And so when we talk about the ACEs score, it might help you tonight to go online and get the copy of the ACEs assessment. Like I said, it's not thorough, but it is a good place to start. And it'll score from 1 to 10 how many adverse childhood events you may have had and give you an idea of what your score might be. Anything over, I think they say anything over a 4, you're going to see some significant impairment at times. Not all the time, because everybody's different, and everybody's bucket is different. And that is why it is so interesting to do couples therapy. Because they come with 2 of these. And when they have 2 of them, and they don't even know they have a bucket, it's very interesting. So sometimes when I'm going through my, requests for services, I go, oh, couples, they're so hard. But they're a good challenge, right? Because if you can teach a couple how to self-regulate and how to understand their bucket and how to process their stuff, guess who they're going to influence? All their little ones. So you're actually hitting 6 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. I don't know. So yeah, what is in your bucket? Be aware that what's in your bucket is normal. It's not bad. It just is. And when you see it that way, to me, it was a great relief. I don't know how to explain it or express it, but it was such a relief to know I wasn't broken. I spent the good part of my early Christian life, and I've been saved 43 years this month. And I started out when I was 20, and from 20 till about 30, I could not figure out how to be calm and sweet and, Christian example and a good mom, because I had this, and it was like, I kept showing up in moments where I was frustrated or stressed or upset or, something, we had to be somewhere or something. And it was like, I don't want to be like that. So I begged God, show me how to do this. I don't know how to do it. And this went on. I can't believe he stuck with me, but he did. Thank you. But he was patient. And I think he knew that someday we could share this. Because if I had just had one of those little float into, whatever type of experiences, I wouldn't have been able to learn all of this because it wouldn't have made sense to me. Like, well, get over it or deal with it or whatever. I know what it feels like to be triggered. I know what it feels like to be flooded. I know what it feels like to rage. It's just what it is. And it happens when you have a lot of trauma. So my score is between a 5 and a 6. And that is actually pretty high. Early on, when I was in my late teens, I had substance abuse issues because of that. Because when you have a lot, if this is my bucket, when you have a lot in your bucket, it feels really nice to put a central nervous system depressant on it. Because for a little while, you can forget what's in your bucket. And for a little while, but then after like 2.5 years, that little central nervous system depressant was not sustainable. I knew I was going to end up just like the very person that caused my trauma. And then we're talking about generational trauma that just keeps going and going and going. And so I said, not knowing about my bucket, stops here. I'm done. I'm not going to keep this going. So at 20, God saw that. I said, I can't keep living like this. I'm going to do the same exact thing, and I can't bear it. I wouldn't even want to get married because I know how it would be. So that was the year, that 1 year, I was 20. That was when God spoke to my heart and said, you don't have to live like that. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? So I thought religion was stupid. And the people that I knew that were religious were hypocrites. So that was like not an option for a long time. Just not an option. Why would I want to do that? Those people are just wasting their time going through all this ritual and all this baloney. Well, when he sent conviction to me, that went way past all of that. And it went deep down into almost like, hey, what are you going to do? Instead of just religion, it wasn't about religion anymore. It was about, what are you going to do? And that was when I was seeking for him. And he showed up. Yeah, he showed up. Yeah. And what I love about God so much is that when he showed up in my messiest times. And after I gave my heart to him, I still, not sinful messy, but just, just didn't know how to do it. And so to me, that, I guess you could say, I stuck like glue, because I knew that if he could stick with me during all of that growing and learning and trying to figure it all out, that's a heavenly Father. So I love that. So how do we process trauma? This is the good part. So we notice when we're triggered, and this is going to seem very simplistic, but if you really understand kind of as I go through this and we'll review it, it is simple, but it's how we're wired, and it's very, very helpful. Changed everything. Notice when you're triggered. Take a few deep breaths. Simple, right? All we've done is notice. Take a few deep breaths. Now we're going to notice what you're feeling. So it might be 3 things. So maybe it's just anger you're going to notice first. I'm furious. You're not going to say it out loud. You're just going to like, so I notice what it is. And then where does it show up? Maybe it might be in my jaw. Maybe it's in my throat. Maybe it's across my chest. Maybe it's in my gut. Notice where it shows up. Who knew? But this is the important part. Now this part, I took this model and changed it, and this is the step that I changed. So in an addiction seminar conference thing I was at, they did this. Notice when you're triggered, take a few deep breaths, notice what emotion you're feeling, notice where it shows up. But this last one, they said, go call a friend, go take a walk, go make a sandwich, go listen to happy music. But that was the problem. Right there was the problem. We can't ignore it or stuff it or push it away or distract ourselves from it. We just need to sit with it and just feel it. And so that 5th step is the essence of how we can work through it. So we let it show up. We're not going to say something or punch somebody or whatever. You're just letting it show up. Remember, I would feel, let's say, anger in here, kind of here. Just, and what happens, like you catch a yawn or a sneeze, it's like that. You catch it, and let it finish. Okay, so maybe if that person upset me, I'm also disappointed. So I would go back and I would say, and I'll show you in this version of it. So you pause, breathe, identify what you're feeling, notice where you feel it in the body, and let it show up and surf it to the shore. So when you're on that 5th step, you don't have to be drowned by the wave, under it. You want to ride it, okay? And when you ride it, it's like catching that yawn or that sneeze. You're working with your nervous system. You're working with how your body works already. You're not making up some new thing. It's just the way we are wired. And you ride the emotion until it goes to the shore. So backwards, pause, breathe, identify the emotion, notice where you feel it in the body, and let it show up and surf it until it diminishes. And so my surfer here, he's riding that wave. He's not getting crushed by it. He's not underneath it. He's riding it until it finishes. And that's what we never knew before. Simple, but essential. So that is the piece when I talk about self-regulation, that's what I'm referring to, is that ability to process there. So sometimes we need help processing. When an event is too big, we might need to work through it with somebody else, because when we have that somebody else, sometimes they can be the scaffolding to help us feel
almost like I'm okay to just burp this, thing that happened to me out, instead of feeling all by yourself or spinning into, some people would spin into panic. So it's kind of when you have somebody help you process, a lot of times it feels like scaffolding or feels like that support system. We can also start with smaller events to learn how. When someone comes into my office and they've had a lot of trauma, we don't go to their trauma. We start with something that happened in 3rd grade where they were disappointed, or some bike accident, or something that is contained in maybe one day. And so they can feel what it felt like to be in that moment and let it finish. And then as they gain that skill, and it is a skill, you gain it and get stronger and stronger at it. When you get to that horrible trauma, that in this case of clients that come in to see me, then it's like a piece of cake. They're fine. They can work through it. It will peak, and then they're done. And we're online here, so I wouldn't say anything that would identify anybody, but very, very significant trauma, things that you would go. And when they can understand their nervous system and start to almost understand that a lot of it is just things that their body and brain have stored, and that they can have a way out of it, it brings hope, and they do the work, and then they start to feel so much better. So it's really an encouraging work. People say, how could you work with trauma? I love it. I love working with trauma, because then they get the tools in therapy, and then they can tell anybody else that they know, and then they can go the rest of their life knowing how to process and how to work through things. So as we gain awareness of our emotions and these reactions, it just gets easier and easier and easier. I don't know if one of my kids is listening, but he told me, Mom, you're different. So remember, I told you about this. Well, in my early mom years, I wish I could push the rewind, because it didn't go real well. Sorry. It just didn't. And we tried our best. We never were on purpose trying to be a bad mom or anything. But I knew that I was in a time of struggle. And when we would travel or go and do things, my stress level would go up. And so he said, we were on a trip, you're just different. And I thought, yeah, it's because I processed all that garbage that I had been carrying around all those years. And now when I get stressed, I have more room. So if I was filled up to here or here, and you empty out, as much as you can, then when you are stressed, you have more capacity, more space, more room to be able to handle that new stress. So we gain self-control, not stuffing self-control, but actually calmer self-control. And then we can function better at work and at school. And I would say, I was telling one of the sisters, my 60s are way more fun than my 20s. Way more fun. And just, there's just so much, I would say, more freedom. And I never left God during all of that. I stuck with him. And luckily, thankfully, he stuck with me. But now I understand so much more about what I was going through. And I beat myself up all those years, just beat myself up. But again, that storage in the midbrain was the culprit, not necessarily me as a person choosing to be frustrated or angry or whatever. Now, did I try to rein myself in and do the right thing? Yeah. So it wasn't like I was, crazy mom, but I wasn't solving what my problem was. I was just stuffing my problem further down. So what I would say to God's people is, often we think of some of the things that happen when we get triggered as a spiritual problem, but sometimes it's a storage problem, and we need to process what has happened so that we can have that freedom again. Now, does God see us and love us anyway? Yeah, he does. He sees us and loves us anyway. And it's not like I said, I wasn't doing all these crazy, wild, sinful things. I wasn't out there, going bananas. but I was struggling with understanding, how could I sound carnal but not feel carnal? How could I sound, fleshly was what we were called, told back in the day, but not feel that way? I didn't feel like I wanted to be fleshly, I wanted to be God's child and serve him and do what he wanted me to do. But it was so frustrating with, that kind of full bucket situation. Now, this is another piece that I love. Uh-oh. I just killed something. Oh, that's just the power. Okay, it's all right. This is left brain and right brain. And this book was written, and you can't see the book, but this book that I'm referring to right now is written by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. And I just love them. I don't even know them. I've just seen them on videos and all that. But they took this very simple information and made it understandable for us as parents, and grandparents. So what they were talking about is the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain. Now, the left hemisphere of the brain, we know, is better at logic and math and kind of rule following and consequences, and kind of that part of us that is maybe more advanced, when we get older, we're better at our left brain. But guess what? Kids don't develop their left brain. They develop their right brain first. They're better at emotion and gut feeling and creativity and intuition. Have you ever noticed a kid can just like read you? They look at you and they're just really good at their right brain. And I always was amazed by that. And then as people get older, they tend to get really stuck in their left brain, And you think of the grumpy old school teacher, get down off of that fence. And the kid's over there having a blast, doing something. But the teacher, or maybe the yard duty, is really rigid, and just in their left brain, and just, this doesn't make sense, and so get off the fence, or whatever they're doing to have fun. And the kids are over there just, looking at butterflies and just having a great time. And so they don't understand, why is that person yelling at me to stop having fun? I don't understand. Well, usually it's more drastic than that. When you think about a parent that's angry at a child and a kid that's really upset in their emotions, they just miss each other. Okay, so Tina Payne Bryson and Dan Siegel wrote a book called The Whole Brain Child. And that book should be given to every single parent or grandparent that ever has anything to do with children. They need to read it. And it's so simple. And that's why I love it, is because it's not complicated or, textbook where your brain is fritzing while you read it. It's very straightforward and simple. So the right brain helps with emotion and intuition. The left brain helps with logic and reasoning. Our goal is to use both sides. And when I say both sides, that's also a word I'll use as integration, meaning you're using your whole brain. So yes, you have logic and consequences and kind of that ability to reason and use logic. But you also have empathy and compassion and trying to understand what that little one is so upset about. So when you have those two things working together, you're integrated. But if you come at them with, it's going to be this way, my way or the highway, and that little kid is like, and it's not that you would compromise. I don't mean that. But when you're using both sides of the brain, you have access to your logic and reasoning, but you also have access to empathy and compassion. So as a parent, a teacher, an auntie, an uncle, a grandparent, we need to be using both sides of the brain. This is called integration. So when a child is in their right brain and they're flooded with emotion, they can't hear your logic anyway. That's this. They're down here in their right brain and you're in your left brain, and you're just going to miss each other. You could yell or reason or explain, and it won't make any difference. You have to reach them so that they can calm down and self-regulate, and then they can hear you. So when we're stuck in our left brain, we're rigid, we can't understand, and we might get more and more stern or upset at them. but it's not going to change anything. We have to be able to get ourselves integrated so that we can reach them. We need to understand when we or they are stuck in one side or the other. So Tina Payne Bryson and Dan Siegel explain it as a river. And if you think of a river flowing down, and down the middle of it is this beautiful, calm place, and you're just flowing down the river. Sometimes kids will get in the rapids, like the rough part of the river, you know? And that's that chaotic emotional state that they get in sometimes. But sometimes we get into the rocks and we're just stuck, like we're in that rigid left brain side. So can somebody in the rocks help somebody in the rapids? Can somebody in the rapids help somebody in the rocks? They're in two different places. But if we're in the middle and we're using that whole brain, the left and the right side, we're flowing together, we're understanding kind of our brain state, then we're able to offer some help. And you know what? They trust you more. When you can be self-regulated and understand that they're dysregulated and help them to get regulated, they trust you more. And I've seen this over and over. When you're regulated and you try to solve a problem with a kid, they look to you more than run from you. So allow yourself to become integrated so you can help them to integrate. So it's like that thing on the airplane when you're supposed to put the oxygen mask on you first. You get integrated first and then help them to get integrated. So again, part of what trauma also involves is attachment. So we have attachment styles that can get in the way of our parenting, our grandparenting, or even our understanding of our own attachment with our current relationships. So there's secure attachment, which is what our goal is. Doesn't happen real often, but it's out there. There's anxious attachment, there's dismissive avoidant, and there's fearful avoidant. Now, I've looked at different authors over the years, and there's different versions of this. But my point here is that with secure attachment, we're going to have healthy boundaries, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to have mutual trust and support, and we're going to have controlled conflict resolution, and we're going to talk about that. So secure attachment is important to families. It's important to relationships. It's important for children to be able to feel loved and heard so that they can go to school and learn. Because it's really hard for kids to go to school and learn when they're stressed out or they have one of these other attachment styles going on. So an anxious attachment is going to have a fear of abandonment, a need for constant validation, and dependent on parent or others for self-worth. And that's a kid that's pretty stressed out. And you want to be able to help that kid to get a more secure attachment. So a fearful avoidant attachment will have oftentimes fear of rejection, a hard time trusting, and low self-esteem. These are generalizations because these different styles have been kind of tweaked over the years, and there's different versions of it, but this is a generalization. With that fear of rejection and a hard time trusting, low self-esteem, they're going to go into the schools and have a hard time. And you've probably seen these kids at school. It's a tough thing for a kid to have an insecure attachment at home and try to go in and learn. Dismissive avoidant attachment often avoids close connections, has commitment issues, and low self-esteem. Now, again, this is a generalization. Sometimes we kind of mix them up in our own personal life, and we might have a piece of this and a piece of that. So it's fluid, right? But our goal is to get to a more secure attachment with our children, our families. Now, a secure attachment, again, just to review, because this is the one we're shooting for, is healthy boundaries, mutual trust. And I wonder if someone could read me Malachi 4 and 6. Is that something someone could do? I see a mic here, but she was here for a while, and then she... Thank you. I like this about secure attachment and the mutual trust and support, how it talks about this in Malachi 4 and 6. Here we go. it on? Can you guys turn this one on? Turn it on is what they're saying. Turn it on.
Is it
Yeah.
on now? Malachi 4:6, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse.
So that's back in the Old Testament, but I thought it was a beautiful example of families turning toward each other instead of away. And when there's that turning toward each other and healing, there's a healing not only in the family, but in the community. And we're going to talk a little bit about controlled conflict resolution. So when we have those secure attachments, you see that little boy, look at his face, and he's looking at his daddy. Do you see that? He just loves him, and he feels safe with them, and he feels comfortable, and they're having a good time. And that is the face of secure attachment. It's beautiful. And when we raise kids that have a secure attachment, guess what? They're going to go out and have secure attachments with other people. And it just spreads. Now, if we have unhealthy attachments, we can heal them. It's not a done deal. And that's the good news. So like I said, there might be bits and pieces that you say, oh, yeah, I kind of noticed that. Well, it can heal. These are things that we can work with. So parenting styles, this is an interesting part of what I was bringing tonight with trauma. Parenting styles can be anything from authoritarian, which is kind of like a sergeant, to neglectful, which would be, not really paying much attention, permissive. Sometimes parents that have gone through a lot, they just let their kids get away with stuff because they feel guilty that they've had to suffer. So that permissive style isn't very helpful, but this is the style we're working toward, authoritative. And authoritative, well, we'll start with authoritarian. It's more parent-driven. There's really strict rules and punishments. It's a one-way communication, parent to kid, that's it. No other communication. And that's what a lot of us that are older were raised with. That was the norm. That was all we knew. And that's what our parents were doing the best they could. They thought that was the gold standard. My way or the highway, because I said so. And those things, with that one-way communication, there was less consideration of the child's emotional needs because the kids just got to get over it. Just deal with it. It's the way it is. But the downside is these kids often have difficulty with self-esteem because they get, kind of beat down a little bit, literally and figuratively. They have difficulty with problem solving because they don't really get to solve problems. They just get told. And a lot of times they have anxiety because they're not quite sure what's going to happen on Friday night and Saturday night. Is it going to work out? Is it not going to work out? Neglectful style is a little bit different in that the parent is uninvolved or absent. Sometimes these families will have a very ill person in the family. And, it makes sense. They're going to get a little bit less attention. But when it's severely neglectful, the child will get very little guidance. They will be indifferent the parent will be indifferent to the child's social emotional needs. And it's not a very nurturing environment. So that kid is going to go out and have trouble with self-discipline, right? They're going to have trouble with being emotionally withdrawn because they're not getting that connection. And they're going to have trouble with anxiety. And that's because they're not quite sure how it's going to be. Am I going to be fed? Am I going to get some shoes for back to school? Am I going to have something to eat for lunch? I guess nowadays it's better. But when I was a kid, if you didn't have something to eat for lunch and you didn't have 35 cents, you were out. So the permissive style is more child-driven, rarely gives or enforces rules, and sometimes this is parenting out of guilt, of wanting to just indulge the kid because things have gone wrong for you, overindulging the child, and very unhealthy boundaries. And the downside of that is a child will often be very impulsive, disregard rules because I don't have to follow them at home, so I don't have to listen to you. And a lot of times aggressive behaviors because there isn't that discipline to teach them how to control themselves. Now, the authoritative is where we're headed and where we want to be in balanced families, in a place where the kids feel secure, And that would be where you solve problems together. And that doesn't mean it's a democratic society. I don't mean it like, everybody gets an equal vote. There is a mom and a dad. There are parents. And if there's grandparents that are raising kids, there are the grandparents. You are in charge. But you want to use the opportunity to teach the children how to solve problems. So if you just tell them what to do all the time, they're never going to learn how to solve a problem. So you solve problems together. Clear rules, clear expectations. Doesn't mean anything goes. Clear, but it also is kind of like you would want somebody to treat you when you had a problem. Well, let me talk to you about it, or explain what's going on. And yeah, but these are the boundaries. These are what I expect. So it's not anything goes, but it's definitely, there's more open communication. You're trying to work together. And sometimes this is helpful, natural consequences. And some parents don't like their kids to suffer natural consequences, so they scoop them up and solve it for them. And when they do that, the kids never learn, or they learn that mom or dad is going to rescue them. So these natural consequences can really help them learn to have that backbone and that stability and that understanding that what they put their hand to or what they get involved in, they're going to have to deal with the consequence. So it can be, where you're working together, but sometimes when it fits, those natural consequences can be a real opportunity to learn. And healthy boundaries. Now, this part is also one of those things where I want you to put an asterisk by it. Healthy boundaries are very important to a family. They're very important to a relationship. They're very important to friendships. So the benefits of the authoritative style, because we're going to go back to the boundary piece. These kids often have better emotional health, better social skills, because they're working out problems, practicing at home, right? Practicing, not go to your room. That's going to happen sometimes, right? Go to their room. But when there's a problem that needs to work through, the problem solving is something that you can use as an opportunity, so they practice it at home. So they're going to have better social skills, secure attachments. And then I'd like someone to read Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, if you can.
And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Okay, and then Colossians 3 and 21.
Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged.
Okay, so fathers and mothers, we're working together as a team. And those things, those precious things that we read in God's word help us to see a dimension of parenting that's very important. And we can't ignore it, and we can't kind of write over it because we were taught differently. But we need to really take those admonitions. I think they're very important. This is also really important. Never withhold love as a punishment to a child. Because when we do that, we're teaching them something. It will damage the attachment between you because they'll feel utterly abandoned when you withhold that love. And it'll teach them to be unkind. And we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to teach them to be kind. So never withhold love as a form of punishment. It'll also cause a lack of respect for others. Because when they felt that hurt, it becomes kind of a habit, and then they'll do it to somebody else. Allow the children to understand you are not okay with their behavior, whatever that happened, but you still love them very much. And that love is going to be that squishy part that helps you get through that moment or that difficulty or that challenge. And that can be, it can make all the difference in them really hearing you and learning from you, or tuning you out and pushing you away. So conflict resolution, it's really a valuable part of a family. It's something that is inevitable, but we have to have some skills around it. So it's a normal part of family life. We need to expect it, but we need to have a plan for it. John Gottman studied relationships, and I really liked his approach because it was very, he observed relationships. He didn't just say, oh, I got this new technique and I want you to use it. He was in a lab looking at couples and organizations that wanted to be studied, teams at work, friendships, whatever. He looked at them for many, many years, and they would come in because they wanted to know how to have better conflict resolution skills. And he would hook them up as monitors to their wrists, their heart, their sweat glands, their all kinds of places on them to be able to collect data about what was going on when they were stressed. And he would give them a really hard task that was difficult to solve and that would be real opinionated and, on purpose. And they knew that. And so they went through these things where they would look at these couples and, like I said, groups. And what he did after all these years of collecting all this data is he boiled it down to something. And this is why I like his work so much. He came up with some observations instead of some techniques. And that's what I like about when I do any of my studying or working or whatever. I want to get to the bottom of it. I don't want to have some new thing that I'm going to forget or something that I'm trying to teach my clients to do, but they're going to forget. I want them to have the essence of the part that is really going to help. So what he did was he found out that when couples, or like I said, team members or whatever, we'll just say couples for the sake of not having to explain all of them. When they defended themselves or blamed the other, it didn't solve the problem. They got stuck in a loop and they became bitter or angry or frustrated, and it just looped and looped and looped. And so he said, defending yourself or blaming the other doesn't work. Instead, he noticed, he didn't come up with this, like I said, he only observed it. He said, use kindness, and this was his word, and it's from Proverbs 15:1. The man is actually Jewish. And Proverbs 15:1 says, go ahead.
A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger.
So he said the people that he observed for all those years, the ones that started the conflict to try and solve it, soft. They had the upper hand, not in a way to win, because really the defend and blame people were trying to win. Kindness didn't really necessarily, on this version, didn't necessarily have to win, but they also were generous. And go ahead and read James 4:6, please.
But he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble.
And you see that word, humble. So this word generosity means you're trying to put yourself in their place. So let's say you're having conflict. You can't decide some big thing that you have to solve in your family. But if you put yourself in the other person's position and ask them questions, what makes you feel so strongly about that? Why do you think that would be a better place to go than this place? Or why do you think we should spend our money on this thing instead of that thing? So if you're generous and you put yourself in their place, that is humility. And that's going to be able to help you to solve the problem. I added this word in his description of this conflict resolution model was kindness and generosity, but I thought respect was really important. Can you read Romans 12:10, please?
Yes. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another.
So when we have respect or prefer one another, it's going to soften the conflict. So we're soft, we're trying to be kind, we're putting ourselves in their position or trying to understand, or maybe even ask questions. Why do you feel that way? What makes it so important to you that you feel that particular view? And then with respect, honoring each other, you might not get your way. you might agree to disagree. You might say, well, how about if we do this and that? Or we could try it with this or that, or, almost like a compromise over that conflict. But in defend and blame, that is not how it works. Somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. And when you defend and blame, it just butts heads, and you might be thinking to yourself, I wish they would be quiet so I could get what I want to say in. And so you're not even listening to the other person. You're just defending yourself and blaming the other and not listening and not solving anything. So what he observed was, try to stay away from defending and blaming. It doesn't work. And try to use a soft answer or kindness, generosity, and I added respect. Because then you're going to have an ability to be with that person, create some healthy habits with them to solve problems in a softer way. You might not win, but in a week, you won't even remember what you were arguing about. You really can't recall. You think, oh yeah, we got really mad about something, but I don't know what it was. So it might not even be worth it. But when we have, the left side of it, you're going to not have those regrets, that we spoiled that weekend trip, or we, didn't get to do that fun thing because everybody was in an uproar. So staying on the other side really helps to resolve the conflict. Very simple. It was only observable by this man and his team for 15 years, but this is the essence of what he came up with, and I think it's very valuable. This piece, I think, is really valuable to prevent future trauma and also to understand our own boundaries for our children, for our families, even our adult siblings. It's important to have healthy boundaries. So it helps us understand and respect our own needs. A healthy boundary. A healthy boundary will also help us to respect the needs of others. Healthy boundaries help us to take responsibility for our actions. We don't like to do that all the time in this country. We don't like to look in the mirror. We don't like to say, well, I probably shouldn't have said it that way. But when we learn and practice the healthy boundary of taking responsibility for our actions, our families are going to get healthier. And when we develop a sense of empathy and caring, that's going to come from healthy boundaries. It doesn't mean that you're, not having boundaries and just, I guess you could say, when we have poor boundaries, you just do anything for anybody. That's a poor boundary. But when you have a healthy boundary and you can develop a sense of healthy empathy and caring, it can be a benefit to the family. But this is the but. We don't want our kids to feel responsible for another's actions or feelings. And at first you think, well, that's not very nice. But when you think about it, if you take responsibility for your sibling's behavior, if you take responsibility for your child's upset or sadness, that is not a healthy boundary. It's not going to teach them to take responsibility for their own behavior. They'll get really good at, well, mom will rescue me. Mom will stick up for me. Dad will tell the teacher what's what. We need to teach them to take responsibility for their actions. They can develop a sense of empathy and caring, but with a good boundary of being responsible. And I have this chart I give, actually all my clients, not just kids, about this is their yard inside here. These are the things that they can control. And then the things that they can't control are outside this yard. Now, sometimes we leave our gate open and somebody will say something hurtful. Let's say you're a kid and you're on the playground and somebody says something hurtful. Well, you got to close your gate. And when you can close your gate, you can keep that calmness, that self-regulation inside of you, and you don't need to accept that grenade that's coming at you from another kid. Maybe a bully, maybe somebody that's just bored and wanting to picking on the other kids. But we have to close our gate. Now, sometimes we have to close our gate in adult relationships and not take responsibility for somebody else's feelings or behavior. Now, it sounds harsh, and those of us that have those squishy hearts, we have to get it. We have to understand that we have to let our children take responsibility for their own actions and behaviors and teach them not to be responsible for somebody else's. So in our, I always worry about when something's online. It's like, oh, great, This hypothetical family that I know of. Sometimes there'll be a situation, and I've seen this in my office, I've seen it, in church family, in other families, you see it all over the place. But you'll see a family and everybody walks on eggshells for this one person. And so then Thanksgiving, or Christmas or whatever, everybody's like, oh, so-and-so's grumpy tonight. Or, oh, so-and-so's upset. So it's not my fault. It's not my responsibility. I can go up to that person and be kind, make them some hot chocolate. I mean, you could do whatever you want to do. It's not like you wouldn't want to be kind, but you're not taking responsibility for their upset. You see the difference? You can still be loving, still be kind. You can actually be more kind because you're not feeling like, oh, it's my fault if they get mad, or oh, if they get upset, we're all going to be. No, you just close your gate, be kind, loving, friendly, warm, everything you need to be, but don't leave your gate open. And when we have that healthy boundary, big relief. It's a big relief because now you're owning what you need to own and letting somebody else own what they need to own. It's a healthy boundary. So we set limits. Sometimes people can never say no. Oh.
We've got 3 minutes.
Oh.
What
Yikes.
would you like to convey before we go off the air?
Helping the kids, meeting them where they're at to help them regulate. We need to be regulated. We want to give them a blank book if they've gone through some trauma. Let them write the story. Let them write it and write it and write it and write it until they finish it. Kids process differently than adults do. Let them tell the story until you're sick of hearing it, but they need to tell it and tell it and tell it until it's done. And just let them do it. People listening to each other's stories, it helps them to connect, and then you're modeling listening. So we can help the kids limit their negative news, spend time with them. This is a big one. Read to them. Read to them. When you read to them, you increase their vocabulary, you increase the connection between you two, and you teach them all kinds of things. They feel connected to you, and they'll listen to you more. So we have all that we need to thrive. We can understand what our part is. We can help our kids regulate. We can understand how we need to be integrated using that whole brain. We can parent with an authoritative style, and we can practice healthy boundaries. So those are the things that we can do with and for our families to thrive. Excellent. All right. Should I take questions, or are we done? Okay.
All right, thank you. I didn't look behind me. I didn't want to look and see people had left because we're used to ending earlier. You all did an excellent job. And to all the parents, I want to give you a hand. Why? Because you're investing in your children, in your families. To those that are online, thank you for joining us. We're going to wrap up our on-stream broadcast, but we're going to give those in the audience an opportunity to hear some questions that were set up. But we invite those online to join us back again tomorrow, starting at 9-something in the morning, about 9:15, all right? That's for day 2. Thank you for all our online viewers. Thank you for joining. And for those that are in the audience, we have something special for you.